Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, Upsize Minnesota, and my group, Club E, welcome to our panel discussion on exit strategies. A successful exit is a success that lasts. The time to begin exit planning is now. And to help business owners better understand best practices in this arena, Upsize Minnesota and Club E has assembled today's event, and we'll introduce a panel of experts who can serve as your trusted advisors as you navigate this process. Upsize Minnesota is a how-to magazine devoted to helping business owners build bigger and more profitable companies. Club E and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, inspire business owners like you to achieve more than you thought possible by providing strategic advice and financial support. In our efforts to provide actionable content, Upsize Minnesota and Club E offer you today's panel, and as such, I want to introduce to you our event sponsors. Avisen Legal is a general practice law firm. Dynasty Leadership Consulting is coaching for high-performance CEOs. Highland Bank is a family-owned community bank. JMBA Financial Advisors, a financial advisory and asset management firm, and Sealed Bid Marketing is an M&A advisory firm. Thank you to all of our sponsors, and I greatly appreciate your support. These events wouldn't be possible without their assistance, so again, thank you very much. With that, let me introduce our panelists, and I will give you their names, and then we'll come back and give them an opportunity to tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. So to my immediate left is Richard S. Brown, Chairman and CEO of JMBA Financial Advisors. Jerry Clark is founder and managing officer of Sealed Bid Marketing. Todd Eberhard is founder and CEO of Dynasty Leadership Consulting. Larry Fox is attorney, shareholder, and co-founder of Avisen Legal. And Bang Hangi is a VP of commercial banking at Highland Bank. Welcome, panelists. So again, why don't we come back down here, Richard? Let's start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your background, bio, and your firm.
Sure. So we just celebrated our 40th year. My mother actually started our firm. We are an independent fee-based firm. We believe in doing our business by being an advocate for our client, and that has worked very well. It's a good platform. We were talking earlier, the panelists and I think the misnomer is that people think that JMBA just deals with larger companies, but we really don't. We deal with all size companies, clients, individual clients, companies, organizations, or families. And for us, we like to help people from all parts of the spectrum. So we are a financial planning firm that does asset management and financial planning. But I think over the years, what's really brought us to the table and helped us with some expertise that we can share with people is our family office. So we have a family office division, and that family office term means so many different things to different people. But really, we do everything from one end of the spectrum to the other. So it gives us an opportunity to understand how to negotiate a sale, how to negotiate a purchase, understand the psychology of what it would be like if you do sell your company, not only just the financial part, but also what's your next steps and what are you going to do. So I'm sure we'll talk more about it later. And
yes, we will. And thank you very much for joining us. So Jerry and I have known one another for a lot of years, so welcome, Jerry.
Yeah,
thank you very much for participating today. Tell us a little bit about your background and Sealed Bid.
Well, it's good to see some familiar faces and new faces here today. Thanks much for having Sealed Bid. I was an old rock and roller that made my way through college playing as a musician and through graduate school as a musician, and kind of morphed from that to concert promoter, managing rock groups, and etc., into eventually being an entrepreneur that sold his businesses. And I said, hey, this sales business sounds pretty interesting. So started Sealed Bid 25 years ago, and work with a great team. Sealed Bid is not Jerry Clark. It's a team of people, of which I have two of our team here, Blake and Isabel over there at the fireplace. Yep. And we're a boutique firm that handles a small group of clients at a time. We consider, a lot of firms will look at when they take a company to market, they'll call it a listing. We call it a project or an engagement. And we've been fortunate for the last many years of the companies we've taken to market, we've sold 100% of those that we take to market. And we market on a confidential basis using a very structured, pragmatic process. And it's all tied to a timeline. And we work very closely with our clients and these gentlemen here, like in this case, working with the transaction team. And Richard and I were chatting, and Todd and the rest of us were talking earlier. And it's so much more about getting that transaction team together early on in the process. And that's what we've been fortunate to do over the years, and it's worked, very successfully for us.
Great, thanks you, Jerry. So Todd and I have had a chance to work on some projects together. So it's fun for me to have Todd here with us today. Todd, tell us a little bit about you and your firm.
Sure. I'm not a rock and roller. In fact, I'm the last one you'd want to hear sing. So with Dynasty Leadership, I work with CEOs that are in their first or last chapter of leadership. So first, if they're just getting started, taking over, usually for a founder. But in this context, if you're in your last 3 years and you're getting ready for a transition, there are absolutely some things that you could and should be doing to get the maximum value out of your business. And for quite a few great businesses, especially here in the Twin Cities, I found that legacy is ultimately important to them. And we'll talk about that much more later, but those become big things to do. And you really want to have your business in the best position to take advantage of that. So that's what I spend my time on. I am a 5-time serial entrepreneur person myself. I've co-founded 5 different businesses. I've sold to private equity. I've sold to management teams. We had one flame out. We had to put that to bed. So you learn a little bit along the way. And I've also had the phenomenal opportunity along the way with my companies and the teams, got to interview over 7,000 small business owners around the country. 7,000. That is an amazing backstage pass. And so as we go through and learn about those things, what we found was there is a certain set of patterns that successful companies. So whether you're in Tennessee or Talladega, it doesn't matter. There are certain things that great companies do. And so what we've done is built those into processes that good companies can create their own flexible framework, because everybody has their own entrepreneurial DNA. And we've helped to use that to be able to create the things that are going to not only help you get the biggest check, but preserve the legacy.
Great, thank you, Todd. So Larry Fox is kind enough to be filling in today, and Larry, as I mentioned, is a co-founder of Visen. Lisa Holter Ankle was supposed to be on the panel. She had a family situation come up just yesterday, so thanks for being flexible and working with us, Larry. Appreciate it very much. Tell us a little bit about your background and the firm's background.
Yeah, Rick, thanks for having us, and it's good to be here. Visen has not been around for a long time. We're a relatively new firm. We've been around about a little over 2 years, and but we've all the partners at Visen have substantial experience. We've all been practicing for 20 plus years, have been partners in some of the larger firms in town. Personally, I started my career at Covington and Burling, which is a big law firm in Washington, D.C. I was a senior attorney at Intel. I was the lawyer for their new business incubator. And then I was general counsel of Cargill Dow. So that's what I did before coming to Visen. And my partners have a similar background, experience, and expertise. So we haven't been around for very long, but we all have deep experience in the areas that we practice in. So what makes us different than all of the other great lawyers in town, and there are really good firms and really good lawyers in town, I think it's because we started out as entrepreneurs, and we found our own firm. And so we've been in your shoes. If you're a business owner, and you have to make payroll, and you have to start up a business, and you're worried about creating value, we've lived it and we felt it. Part of the startup capital from our firm, when we initiated the firm, was from one of our M&A sellers. And one of our M&A sellers literally drove downtown and dropped a check off in advance for payment on an M&A deal that we did for him. It was a family company that was sold to a private equity buyer. So we have very personal relationships with our clients. We answer calls late at night. We know how stressful it is to sell a business. We're attentive to them, and we don't have a leverage practice. So that means you get us on the phone. We're the people who are doing your deal. We're the people with experience drafting and reviewing and doing the work. So you're not going to end up being pushed to somebody in Denver that you don't know working on your deal who you've never met. So we're really happy to be here. Thank you, Rick, for inviting us.
Great, and thank you again for filling in and being flexible with your schedule. I appreciate it. Ben, tell us a little bit about you and Highland Bank.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Thanks for having us today. As Rick mentioned, I'm Ben Hange, a commercial banker at Highland Bank. Highland Bank is a local family-owned organization. We focus on creative lending structures and relationship-focused lending. And we've been doing a lot of financing for ownership transitions recently. Me personally, I've been in banking 15 years. I've been on the commercial side for about 10 years. I'm passionate to help business owners succeed and make banking easy by demystifying the entire credit process. When I'm not working, I enjoy traveling with my wife and kids and golfing, and also getting my heart broken by Minnesota sports teams. My main focus, is, as I said, is providing financing for ownership changes. Everything from partner buyouts to strategic acquisitions to private equity acquisitions. And with that experience, I'll be looking at today's topic from a little bit of a different lens than the other panelists. My experience relates to how banks and buyers look at businesses that are being acquired and how bank financing can impact the overall process. Obviously, not all exits involve bank financing, but many of the due diligence items that banks perform are universal drivers in maximizing value and simplifying the overall process. So I'm hoping my perspective today will help sellers be prepared for questions that banks and buyers will ask. And I'm excited to get started.
Great. So I'm going to give the panelists a little bit of time to talk about the topic from their lens, and then I have a couple of questions for each one of the panelists, and then we'll get to some more broad questions for the panel. At that point, I'll give you all a heads up, and you can raise your hand. I'll try to weave you into the conversation if I can, so you can think about questions here as we're going through things, jot them down, and there'll be an opportunity for you later to participate if you would like. So let's come back down here and start again. Closest to me, Richard, tell us a little bit kind of from your perspective, your view on the topic, and a little bit more detail around today's discussion.
Sure. Well, of course, it's an important topic. Someone has worked a lifetime or whatever period of time to build equity in a company that they're either selling or they're looking at the other side where they're purchasing. And, especially when you're selling, there are the easy two things. Number one, am I going to have enough money to live on if that's what I want from this sale? And then from a financial planning standpoint, what does that look like? That's A and B. I think the most important part truly is the psychological part of it. What does it mean? So now you've sold your business, and really I think at the time people are dealing with the folks here on this panel, their tax folks, their lawyers, whoever it may be, they're really trying to figure out, are they getting the best deal for this legacy business that they built? And they do get wrapped up in that a lot, which is very important. But what happens the next day when it's done? And if you are used to having your own business and running everything through your business, from your accounting to all the different things, HR, and the next morning you're on your own. What does that look like? How does that feel for you? How does that feel for your spouse, your family? And those are some of the bigger things that we see. We've had clients come in and one spouse who's run a company is ready to sell it. He's very excited, you know, he or she, and they're looking at playing golf and spending more time, and then they get up and take a bathroom break, and I ask the other spouse, well, how do you feel about this? And they'll break down and start crying, going, my space that I had built for 20 years is now being taken away. So there's the financial aspect of it, planning aspect of it, and then truly, what does it mean for you and your family, and how are you going to go into the next stage? And then from there, there's all kinds of things. Do you put money aside in the transaction to think about maybe getting back into something? Do you give yourself some time off? In a lot of the cases, people will say they're going to retire, and it's very hard to flip that switch. They think it's going to be easy, but they find that it's hard. And I find that sometimes a year or two later, they want to get back into the game. So you have to think of all of those things as you're negotiating your deal and preparing yourself for that sale.
Great, thank you very much. Jerry?
That's well said.
Thank you.
That's good. I have nothing. No, no, that's so true. You know, the emotional aspect is huge. It's huge. I just got off the phone with one of our clients this morning, and he said, well, I took last week off just to figure out, my wife and I, to figure out what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. And sure, the money comes into it. Sometimes sellers, unfortunately, they'll be thinking of selling their company, and you mentioned the dollar aspect. They'll say, well, I need $2 million or $3 million or $5 million. So my company should be worth that much at least. It's, you know, that's the other perspective. Sellers sometimes are not realistic, and that's why they need to get a quality group together, a transaction team to advise them through the process. What does Seal Bid or any other quality M&A firm do? Our true role is we execute, we facilitate the exit strategy. Now remember, you have your succession plan. Your succession plan includes a business plan, which is how the company's going to be managed. These are done early on. And then you have your estate which is where Richard and his team and others come in to figure out what's going to happen personally to me. And then the part where we come in a lot is the exit strategy. That's part of your overall succession plan. And what Seal Bid does a great job at, and we pride ourselves in, is a structured transaction plan. And we're pragmatic to a fault, maybe, perhaps, sometimes, but we'll review the business. We'll do the business review. We'll create the confidential information memorandum as all the others do, but we do a marketing campaign on a confidential basis, and then we work through the negotiations, and then finally get to the due diligence and the closing of the transaction. And this can be a period of 6 to 8 months if it all goes well. I mean, this is the actual selling of the company. But the key is also you have to understand the buying universe. Well, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller, to whom do you want this company to be sold to? Do you want it to go to that strategic acquirer who's your competitor? Or are you concerned about the continuance of your company as it is today and will continue with your existing management team, or possibly be merged into another entity with a strategic acquirer? It may not act as it is being operated today. Those are some of the aspects we look at. But the financial prospects, we vet them, and again, that's the whole key, to understand what your client wants. But at the end of the day, it's all about the collaboration with the deal team and getting the transaction done in the best method for what your seller truly wants to, finalize at the end of the day. Is it dollars? Is it the management team? Is it the employees? What is the seller's desires?
So just a quick question, Jerry. You touched on it the first part of your comments about sellers being realistic. So if there's a pie and 100% is those sellers are realistic, how big is that piece of the pie as terms of their pricing expectations? Let's be truthful here. So I'm guessing it's kind of a small sliver.
Yeah, I mean, the true value, yes, sometimes it is, but again, it's planning, and hopefully you can set the table in a realistic expectations. We have one right now where it's, we're meeting some challenge. We had the realistic expectations of value. We have offers coming in that are actually in that range of value, and all of a sudden, our sellers think it should be worth more than that range of value, so.
Can't win, can you?
I know, it's tough,
It's tough.
it's tough.
It's tough. All right, Todd, tell us a little bit about today's topic from your vantage point.
Yeah, when you're getting ready for a transition, you know, that could be passing it on to the next level of management. That could be passing it on to family, son or daughter. Could be an outright sale or an ESOP. There's all kinds of different things, and there's a right fit for each company. But the truth is, we're all going to have to make that as business owners. You're going to have to make a transition. So I look at that as your financial Super Bowl, right? Most of us, we get one shot, right? And it represents the body of decades worth of work. And I found that there are typically two groups that the owners fall into. There is the rugged individualist, the person who's going to try and do it all. They won't grab a team. They will try and take care of it all themselves.
Yeah.
And they will also get their wisdom and advice from the same place that they watch cat videos. The other group is the group that's going to go pro, that's going to find people, because they only get one shot at this, they want to find the best fit possible for them, and that's where we'll spend our time. My own personal experience, when we were selling one of our companies, we were thinking we were going to be excited if there were just 12 companies would show up, and wouldn't that be wonderful, and get it down to a few. And what happened was, for that particular time in our situation, we had over 200 letters of interest coming at us. And had we not had talented people like Jerry, Richard, Larry, and Ben around us, we would have been swamped, and we would have probably missed out on the one that ended becoming the best fit for us. So when I spend my time coaching and getting these people ready, it's getting them prepared for what's to come. It's helping them work through the backside, because absolutely there's a huge emotional component to that. I mean, look, we all think of ourselves as super rational people, right? We do the research, we crunch the numbers, we have great questions, we do all this stuff. But man, oh man, you come down to the 11th hour and it's couch time. It is just one of the most emotional, racking things you'll ever do. It's your baby. You're giving away your baby. And so you want to make sure, one, you're as prepared as possible, the business as professional as possible. You have all the right systems in place that you can possibly do so that you show well to others. But then you also have to help prepare for something that you're only going to do once. And that's a very hard thing if you've never seen the other side of it. And so we spend our time doing that. We also spend our time working with the ones that, man, you hope there's 200 coming in, but it just may not be the right time in the market, or it may be a cold lapse, and you have to deal with, we got to keep moving forward. How are we going to manage with that? How are we going to keep the team moving? And then you talk about the team, and we were having a conversation about that as well. And while you probably have a very strong leader, strong owner, there's always a second in command and some other people that you want to figure out, who should I tell? When do I let them know what's going to happen? How many people? Should I tell the whole company? Do I tell no one? All those questions you need to have some answers for, and it's best not to wait until you're standing in front of them to do that. So getting that ready. If you think about it from the other side, and this is where Jerry really shines, is you want to match up not only for the best price, but culture fit. How are we going to get along with the people across the table? Because even if it's only a short-term transition and you're planning to go to Naples after that, you have a whole team of people that are going to be working with them going forward, people that have invested their life in you, and you want that to be a good fit. So all these things come up, and we need to put that in a working process that allows you to continue to do business and have a whole separate Clark Kent lifestyle, where you figure out, okay, what's this going to look like in the background?
Great, thank you. Larry?
Yeah, we like to get involved as early as possible with our clients, and we can do that at times because we provide them with their day-to-day legal work, where they're outside general counsel for companies that don't have, they're not big enough to have an in-house legal team. And so we can provide a lot of value when we're doing that because we can anticipate the sale in advance and get the company ready for the sale. We know that's not always possible. Sometimes we get pulled in when there's an unsolicited offer or multiple offers from a PE firm. And then sometimes we get pulled in from a referral when someone's company's day-to-day counsel doesn't have the experience to handle a larger transaction. So we get involved in all aspects or at all times, but we do like to get involved early. So my advice would be, if you're thinking of selling your company, to engage counsel as early on in the process. Now, how do we get involved? We'll get involved in negotiating the agreement for the owner with their business broker or investment banker, paying special attention, for example, to tail periods in those agreements, kind of like a agreement that you have when you sell your home. If there's a certain period, if you decide not to work with the broker, that you have to pay the fee anyway. So kind of thinking of those situations where it may not work out with a broker and you have to move to another broker. And then we'll also get involved in negotiating letters of intent with counterparties. And those are really important. You don't want to negotiate those without counsel. Because especially with a PE buyer, they're going to be very intentional about what they put in a letter of intent. And even though it may be a non-binding letter of intent, it's very hard. It kind of puts a stake in the ground in terms of deal terms, and it's very hard to move off of those terms in a negotiation, after the fact. And the things that we like to look at in those letters of intent are lockup periods, for example. So let's say you have multiple offers and you decide to go with one particular offer. There's a period in which you may agree not to negotiate with other parties. We like to keep those as short as possible, right? Just nuanced things that a lawyer will notice in reading a term sheet, like, well, your price is going to be based off recurring revenue, a multiple of recurring revenue and not revenue. And what does that mean? And have you asked the buyer what that means? And do you know what it means? And a deal can completely fall apart. So you may have multiple competing offers, and this one looks really great. It's 7 times recurring revenue, and the other one is 3 times revenue, and it might be a lot better to take 3 times revenue. So those little things that a lawyer will notice are really important. And then things like earnouts and how to structure the earnouts, or adjustments to working capital. Those are a lot of times things that you want to cover in the letter of intent. And then we help the companies with their due diligence process. And I think companies underestimate how burdensome that is going to be. They're running the business, right? They have to maintain a profitable business, and then they have to satisfy the needs of the buyer for information. So we help them set up a database or a deal, kind of an electronic database for the deal that has all their key documents. We spot issues that they may not spot, for example, whether they have independent contractors who should be classified as employees. And it's kind of like selling a house. If you don't fix your porch and it doesn't look tidy, people are going to worry, what else is wrong with this house, right? So they see cracks in the foundation, and they worry, what other deferred maintenance have you not taken care of? So as a lawyer, we know what the buyers are looking for in terms of deferred maintenance or cracks in the foundation. And we can bring in the contractors and we can get the work done in advance of the sale. And then finally, we negotiate and document the deals. We understand what's market in terms of deal terms. We can get you the best deal, whether it comes to what is the holdback for, how much are you going to maintain at risk to back up your reps and warranties? What's an appropriate indemnification, and matters like that. So I would say engage us early, help us fix the cracks in your foundation, get the company looking really good for sale, and then we know these advisors, right? And so if you get us involved early, we can hook you up with the right advisors and look at the tax aspects of the transaction, make sure you understand them. There may be, for example, structuring something, if you're a seller as a stock sale, may be a lot better than structuring it as an asset sale because you don't have to pay 2 levels of taxation. You're going to get double tax. So you want to understand the tax impact of your deal. We'll help you do that, and we'll help flag the issue, connect you with the right advisor so that you can evaluate the term sheet and potentially restructure it. It'll make a big difference in terms of your bottom line.
Great, thank you. Ben?
Thanks, Rick. So I'm going to look at this more so from a financial perspective. I'm going to talk about the bank due diligence process as well as kind of the bank deal structuring process. So just going to talk about a high-level overview of what the bank due diligence process looks like. And obviously the buyer will probably ask a lot of these questions as well, but just kind of to get the sellers prepared for what's going to be asked of them. So typically the bank will take a look at 3 years of historical financials. They'll look at trends in revenue, margins, expenses, and profitability. The bank will probably also ask for a breakdown in revenue by customer just to see if there are any revenue concentrations. And so as a seller, I would recommend having good explanations for any negative trends or customer concentrations readily available. The bank will also take a look at interim financials and look for the same kinds of trends. If you have receivables in your company, the bank will take a look at your receivable aging and try to look for any concentrations within that as well. The bank will also ask for 2 to 3 years of projections and ask for the underlying assumptions behind those projections. So I'd recommend working with the buyer to make sure that the projections are feasible and that any negative trends in the projections have a good explanation. The bank will also complete due diligence on any individual buyers who will have ownership of 20% or more in the company. We'll take a look at the buyer's ability to make the down payment as well as any leftover liquidity that will be available if there's a hiccup in the business after the acquisition. We'll also take a look at kind of the buyer's personal net worth, as well as their credit report. So as a seller, it's a good idea to do a little research on your buyer because you don't want to end up wasting time with an unqualified buyer. Other third-party due diligence that may occur is quality of earnings, business valuations, collateral audits, or equipment appraisals. And if real estate is involved, there will likely be a real estate appraisal and environmental work done. Next are some common questions that a bank will ask you on an acquisition deal. Typically, there are add-back expenses that the seller runs through the business that aren't essential business expenses. So the bank will ask questions about those, and so it's a good idea to keep detailed records of those add-backs as you categorize what are non-essential expenses. The bank will want to obviously understand if there's any customer concentrations and if the company's profitability is overly reliant on a small group of customers or a certain industry. The The bank will also want to understand the seller's role in the company and if that individual will be difficult to replace. As a seller, you might be asked to stay on after the sale to help with the transition period. The bank might also ask questions about the seller's relationship with customers to determine what kind of turnover there's going to be after that. And the bank may ask if the seller's employees are aware of the transition. The topic of seller financing might come up as well, since banks and buyers typically view seller financing as a positive thing, since the seller is vested in the success of the business after the exit. The bank will also want to understand the quality of financial information as well as any ERP or similar systems that are in place. Other considerations are to open a line of communication with the bank, just so that you can stay up to date on the financing process and provide direct answers to the bank so that your answers don't get lost in translation. And from a deal structuring perspective, there are typically two different ways that acquisition deals are financed, either conventionally or via SBA financing. Typically, conventional financing is reserved for stronger buyers and stronger companies, and that process is a little bit quicker than the SBA process. But on SBA acquisitions, there's typically a few different reasons why a buyer would go the SBA route. And it's if the buyer wants to minimize the down payment, or if they want a longer amortization period for cash flow reasons, or if there's a substantial lack of collateral, the SBA guarantee will help with that. SBA loans typically take a little bit longer than conventional loans, but it's still a manageable process overall.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. A couple of questions for each of you. Todd, let's start with you first. You typically work with either new CEOs or those getting ready to exit. In your opinion, what can owners do to maximize the valuation of their business?
I would say one of the best things that they can do, I would look at it as professionalizing the business. And think about it like separating art from science, right? If it's CEO, if you're an owner and you're particularly good at the sales end of it, you're the one that closes the big accounts, or all new hires have to go through you, or any decision over $5,000 has got to cross your desk, those kind of things. You want to be able to get systems in place that say, okay, I have other good people, they're all perfectly capable, and if I were to be gone, this would still happen. So if you go with the artwork, you got one great person painting, right? They're the Picasso. But if you take them out, the business isn't worth as much. In a science world, you think about it more like McDonald's or Jiffy Lube, where you have a 10-point system and smart people can handle that. We spend all of our time creating things that are not only systematic for the business, so it still takes your entrepreneurial DNA. It takes the things that make you special as a manufacturer, as a contractor, whatever that happens to be. But it also allows you to be able to, if you're going to sell the business, show them that you have some valuable things that you've done to professionalize the business that they could take and scale. So that's the idea of you want to separate art from science. Get that business in a position where you have systems that everybody can operate and do well.
And then kind of the flip side of that is, given all the various past experiences you've had, including doing, as you said, 5 deals yourself, what's the biggest mistake owners make in terms of leaving money on the table when they sell?
Yeah, so the flip side would be delegation for that. I see quite often, in fact, look, early on in my entrepreneurial career, I was totally guilty of it. I held on to sales way too long because I love doing it. I love closing the deal, love being part of that. I held on to managing the teams too long, and it kept us from making bigger decisions. But you can tell once it's painfully obvious exactly where those things need to go. Those were valuable lessons. And you start to look for what are those triggering moments going forward. Where are we at a tipping point? One of the easiest rules of thumb that I look for is if I have someone else in my business that can do it 80% as good as me, I should be passing that off so long as they're interested and excited and taking care of that, and let them grow into that. Because guaranteed, there are bigger problems ahead. There are bigger opportunities. And so taking a look at that delegation, We get a lot of owners that we'll sit and talk to, and they'll say, you know what? I'm just really good at it. I'm sure they are, right? Or they'll say, I tried that before. You know what? I got it back, and it was a total mess. It was broken. I had to fix it, and it took forever. It's like, okay, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. We want to think about what it takes to be able to hand off those things. Now, the truth is, there's tons of things in any given day. If you're a business owner, you would love to hand off, right? So they're out there. But there are also a few key things that you love doing that really make your day, that when the day is really crappy, you could go back to those and it kind of makes you happy again, okay? We still have to look at those. So if you think about somebody like a Mark Zuckerberg, right? If he was still programming code, they wouldn't be much further than the Harvard dorm room right now. And he wouldn't be sitting down with Congress and having all these wonderful conversations. So you got to look to that, you know, is it business generation? Is it our hiring process? What goes on that does that we can make professionalized so that we can show them, hey, we have a process. It's a unique process for us, but it's still a process.
Okay, great. Jerry, let's go to you next. You've seen several M&A markets ebb and flow over the years that you've been in business.
Why do you say that? Does I look that old?
Well, you've also seen rock and roll trends come. and go,
Okay,
too.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Whether it's
and roll.
rock and roll or that's a new one. I did not know that, so that'll lead to another conversation at a different day.
Okay.
But in terms of the current M&A market, what characteristics or features of businesses do you think are most attractive to buyers?
You know, Blake and I chatted about this quite a bit before today, and you know, it all goes down to, and you said it, Todd. It's management depth. It really is. Even if it's a small company, you still have to get that owner out of the day-to-day fray. You know, he or she needs to back off, and they really look to the management depth. And I guess another item that we're seeing more so is even with small financial groups acquiring companies. We deal a lot with small financial groups, small family offices. Not always. Well, we also work a lot with private equity, but even when they look at a smaller company, they really like to see if it's a owner that wants to stay on in some capacity in a minority ownership position, or management to invest alongside the acquirer. They want to see somebody have a stake, as you mentioned with an SBA loan. You know, it's like that owner taking that subordinated note because he or she is now invested in the process going forward. So I would say those are two key items that really
Okay.
really jump out.
And then like with Todd, the flip side of that, what do you think are the most common missteps or sticking points that you've seen in the sale process?
I would say the number one sticking point that we have seen in the last several years is not having the proper agreements with your sales team, the proper agreements in place, whether they're a viable non-compete, I'll defer to legal, or non-solicitation or whatever it may be. We've had the most problematic situations. We've had sales teams or sales managers or whoever may be in the case hold the deal hostage at the 11th hour because of those agreements not being in place, and with an owner that's not willing to share some of the upside of selling his or her company with those individuals. So that's probably the number one roadblock.
Okay, great. Larry, let's jump down to you. You touched on it earlier, but I want you to reiterate and talk about it a little bit more. When's the right time to have a company start talking to their counsel when they're thinking about this, whether they get an unsolicited call from somebody in the industry or a private equity firm, or whether they're just kind of kicking the idea of an exit around? When's the right time to get involved with counsel?
I'd say, honestly, the best time is 3 to 5 years before you're thinking of selling the company, because then we can really address these issues. Mm-hmm. So, if you don't have appropriate non-competes, as was mentioned, in your business, we can advise you on getting them in place, and we could do kind of a health tune-up on your business to determine what needs to get done to get it ready for sale. If you have oral arrangements, right, oral agreements, we can document those and put them in writing. Kind of a handshake deal that you have with a key distributor. We could look at your business and determine if you're too concentrated from a customer perspective. Now, so I would say, try to do it 3 to 5 years out, or at least 3 years out. That's not always possible. Sometimes you're going to get an unsolicited offer from a couple of private equity buyers, and then certainly engage us to review your letters of intent, get appropriate confidentiality agreements in place, and then kick off the process. But don't sign anything without talking to a lawyer or having them review it.
But the key is you want to have an M&A person come in and orchestrate that competition, though, right, Larry?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, right?
Right, right.
All right,
I just
so
wanted to put that in there.
not that we need the full law school class definition or answer on this, but give us a high-level sense of reps and warranties, how they work, how they're used in M&A transactions, and then you've been practicing law for about 25 years. How have you seen that change over time?
Yeah, a rep and warranty in a deal is just the promise that certain aspects of the business are as indicated. So, for example, that your financial statements provide a fair and accurate representation of the business, and that they're materially accurate, or that your assets are in good condition, your manufacturing assets are in good condition, reasonable wear and tear accepted, and that kind of goes to the idea: is there a lot of deferred maintenance in the business that I don't know about? So it's really presenting the business, what you've said about the business and what you indicated about the business is as promised, so that you've paid your taxes, for example. You own your intellectual property. You don't know of any big issues that the buyer should really know about. And so how they're used in the deal is typically a certain portion of the deal value is reserved and put at risk if the representations and warranties are not accurate. Now, certain reps and warranties are not subject to limits or baskets, for example, that you've paid your taxes. I mean, you're going to get nicked if you haven't paid your taxes, and you represent that you have paid them. But other things, unknowns, that there are no patents that you infringe in your business, you may not know about that, and a claim may come in a period after the sale's completed. So what's typically done is a certain portion of the purchase price, say from 10% to even 100% or 50% of the purchase price, is still at risk after the transaction closes, okay? And then there's a period of time, say 1 to 3 years, that if something comes up that's inconsistent with what you represented, that money will be clawed back by the buyer. And some of it can be held in escrow, and another portion of it is just at risk, and you may have to pay it back. And, the mean in large deals is 10% holdback for indemnification, that your reps and warranties are true. But in smaller deals, we see it, go higher, even up to 50% or 100%. Because in a small deal, even a little thing can make a material difference. The way they've changed over time is we see more reps and warranties on hot issues like privacy that didn't exist before. So issues around privacy, classification of independent contractors and employees, deferred compensation issues around Internal Revenue Code 409A, those kind of hot button issues are areas of focus. But certainly making sure that you have a good accountant and your financials are accurate is, I think, one of the most important things you could do to protect yourself against a claim after the transition closes, that your escrow will be at risk, for being nicked and pulled back.
Okay, great, thank you. So Ben, typically you work with buyers, but in your experience, what can sellers do to ensure a smooth kind of bank financing process and then a timely closing? And then similarly for the buyers out there, what's one thing that they can keep in mind in working with their banker?
Yeah, so for sellers, I would say the biggest thing is trying to decrease as much risk within your business as possible. It's everything from trying to reduce the amount of non-essential expenses that you run through the business, reducing your customer and industry concentrations, also ensuring, as everyone mentioned previously, that you have a strong management team as well as strong systems in place, and also try to do some due diligence on the buyer, just to make sure that it's a good fit and that the transaction won't fall apart at the 11th hour. With respect to buyers, I'd say that when you're dealing with your banker on an acquisition, just remember that ultimately your goals are aligned and your banker wants your new business to be just as successful as you do. So make sure to keep your banker informed and provide timely financials and things that the bank requests.
Great, and then as a seller, are business owners these days being required to finance a portion of the sale, and what are kind of current trends in that area?
Yeah, so in my experience, pretty much all of the transactions that I've worked on include some form of seller financing. Obviously, as I mentioned before, banks and buyers like to see the seller financing just to ensure that the seller is vested in the company after the exit occurs. And as far as current trends, I'd say that it really depends on the type of deal. If it's a larger deal, the seller financing looks different than if it's a smaller SBA deal. So it just really kind of depends on the situation.
Okay, so I'm going to pin you down. It depends. That's not a good enough answer. We got a lot of people out here who have, trying to weigh things down, but just it can even be a range. But what kind of percentage of a transaction is typical, or again a range? And there's rates and durations and stuff, but again, just a range. We're not going to hold you to it, but everybody's kind of curious.
Yeah, so I'd say
Including
that as far as the range that I've seen recently is probably 5 to 15%, depending again on the transaction. And if it's a smaller SBA deal and the buyer wants to try to count your seller financing as equity towards their equity injection that's required by the SBA, you'd have to be prepared to receive no payments on that debt for the term of the SBA loan, which is typically 10 years. So that catches a lot of sellers by surprise. But
Okay, hold it. Make that statement one more time, just so everybody, because I think that's important, so everybody hears that statement. Say it one more time.
Yeah, so on SBA transactions, there's a 10% down payment requirement, but the buyer can utilize 5% of seller financing to count towards that 10% if that debt is on full standby for the length of the SBA loan, which is typically 10 years. So the seller would receive no payments. Interest can accrue, but they can't receive any type of payments on that seller financing for the length of the loan.
Okay, and for non-SBA, what's kind of a typical interest rate or duration on these seller financing notes?
Yeah, and again, it depends on the situation, but typically it's about a 5-year amortization period with payments starting immediately. And, the interest rate really depends on the deal, but it's typically, I'd say, somewhere between 3 and 7%.
Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, we if there's a seller subordinated note on our deals, it typically is interest only, and it's usually at a preferred rate, like you mentioned, it could be that 5 to 7%. It'd be interest only with a balloon in 5 years, 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
We're seeing mostly.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ben. All right. So, Richard, you've been very patient. You had to wait a long time.
This is great stuff. I'm assuming everybody's appreciating this because I am.
Couple of things that came to mind after your earlier comments, but I didn't ask you then, so I want to ask a couple of questions and then get to the ones that we talked about before today. But you mentioned folks kind of getting to a number. again, not that we need the full course on it, but kind of how hard is it for people to figure out what their number is?
Well, people have written books on what's the number. You have to take a look at your lifestyle today. You have to back up. You have to take a look, is this the deal that's going to give you your rock so that you ultimately can live the rest of your life in the same lifestyle you've become accustomed to? That's the first thing you have to figure out. And then, well, what does that mean? Are you going to travel more? Are you going to downsize? Maybe you won't buy suits like you used to. All those things you really have to sit down and take your time and put together a checklist of what does this mean to me. If you do that, and sometimes you have to do it a few times and utilize the help of your advisors, you can get to the number fairly accurately.
Okay. All right, great. And then the other thing that came up was people thinking they're going to retire, they're going to Naples, they're going to the lake, they're going to Arizona, whatever. How many people that actually think they're going to do that stick to that?
That's a great question. I see about 50%. Now, the 50% that say they're going to and don't, they might get involved in boards. They might get on 2 or 3 boards. They might become a silent partner in something, but they can't find the way, especially an entrepreneur, someone who's built a business and worked really hard to get there. It's very hard for them just to turn that switch off and sit on a beach and go play golf. Now, there are some that can do it, and I love talking to them and see how life's going. But I would say 50% of the people who say they're going to do that are, within a year to 3 years, find themselves busy again.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. Okay, so you've been doing JMBA for about 25 years. How do you, as a financial advisor, define success when the exiting strategy has been executed?
Sure. So a big part is, did we hit all the things that your team put together? Did all of the things that you would hope for from a closing of a deal to the financial aspects of a deal happen? That's one part. That's half of it. The second part is pretty much going back to your question you asked before. How are they feeling from a psychological standpoint? You could have the bank account full of money and be very unhappy. So if the dream was to get X amount of dollars for the company and you receive that, but now you can't take that next chapter and be happy with the rest of the chapters coming up in your life, then we haven't been successful. And we haven't done a good enough job talking about those things.
Okay. All right, so then the other thing that I wanted to ask you, again, kind of the flip side, I asked a couple of other folks, in terms of a challenge, talk to us a little bit about an example of something that unexpectedly came up during an exit, and you were able to help your client or clients through that.
Well, I have my favorite story. I have two, but my favorite story is a client, and it was a very sad situation. So we had a husband and wife who were partners in a business, and for the 2 or 3 years we were working on selling that business. They wanted to sell the business. The husband was the salesperson, and he really was a pure entrepreneur. So he was in a couple of businesses within this business, and his wife ran the operations of the business. As we were getting closer to a sale, and they were one of the fastest growing companies, all the great accolades that come along with success, he died of a heart attack in his 40s. And, obviously the spouse was just enormously distraught, only believed in her husband as the salesperson. As she used to say, she was just the operations person. Within 2 weeks, the bank, one of the big banks, decided not to continue the line of credit. It was due up at the wrong time, and they said with him being gone, no one's going to be able to sell. So we sat down And those are the things I like to deal with because obviously those are the wrong answers to give to somebody. That's not fair. It's just a shame. I found a new bank. We got a new line of credit. Today, the company is worth 5 times what it was when they were going to sell it, and she has become the salesperson. So it was very fun to watch this, and she's remarried now, and life is good. But at that time, the family and the people around her felt she should sell it and just move on. Now, we talk about what would those next chapters look like and how sad that would have been. And it's not there today, and she's thriving. It's wonderful. Another difficult story, we were working on for a client, a $65 million acquisition, and it's a big acquisition for a company. And I just didn't feel right about it when it came to the person they were going to acquire wanted to become the vice chair of the board. My client obviously being the chair of the board. But my client also wanted one of his family members to be part of that board and be the next succession plan. And I waited and let all the advisors have their own opinions. They all wanted to do it because they thought there was a great ability to grow that company in revenue, and there was, but I knew it would not work. And I waited till 9 o'clock. That was the best time to see my client at the end of the day at 9 p.m. And I went there, and I didn't go in my suit. I just went in my regular clothes that I would go home and lounge in. And this is a very successful businessman in town. And I said, you can't do it. It won't work. He said, well, why do you think that? And I explained it to him. And within 48 hours of really closing the deal, he decided not to do it. And I aggressively went after, there was a $15 million earnest money check that was put down that rightfully so, those people who were selling were entitled to, and they gave back all of it. So these are things that if you have a passion for and you believe in advocacy and doing the right thing for your client and the fiduciary role that we play, you really can help people, but you have to have a team like this. It's very important.
Great. Okay, if anybody has any questions, I do have more questions. I'll keep going on these, but I kind of got through the stuff that I really wanted to, so if somebody wants to chime in, feel free to have one over here. Yes? So the question, if you didn't hear it over here, was for the seller, let's say they enter into a 2-year consulting contract with the buyer to work with the business, how often do they typically see that out? Or in general, how often do they go into it before it ends up being terminated on one side or the other?
I'll just start out with saying, and we all have seen this, they usually don't last.
Yep,
They don't
totally.
stay there. They're buying the business because they believe they have a perceived value of how to change it, and it normally doesn't last the time period.
That's what we've seen also. They'll honor the consulting agreement fees for whether it's a year or 2 years, but and they'll gain whatever knowledge, the buyer can gain whatever knowledge it can over a short duration, and then it'll be, well, Mr. Seller, you really don't need to come in anymore.
Yeah, from my experience, and I think statistically speaking, the founder lasts about 6 months. I can say from personal experience, that's almost perfect to the day.
Yeah, I agree with my panelists on the timing. The only exception is if you have a real earnout, connected to that. With potentially a PE buyer who's going to be your new boss. I've had 2 clients who've sold their businesses and then ended up working harder than they've ever worked in their lives. So that's another thing to be careful about is it just straight up consulting gig where you're hanging out, being available to answer questions, or, is a key portion of your purchase price tied up in an earnout, because in those cases, I've seen people working extremely hard to get that earnout met.
Can I ask Larry a question? May I ask Larry a question?
Sure.
How often do you see earnouts?
Oh, I see them quite a bit. It depends
But
on
you do a lot of technology though,
It
right?
just, yeah, but it's, yeah, because companies sometimes are hard to value,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Or you'll have a young, like, I have a young guy who was selling his company, and it was a software company.
Okay.
And it was very hard to value the company because technology was early. They didn't have a lot of customers, but they had potential traction. They were selling to some competitors, which
Okay.
posed their own issues, and or even somebody who's older. We sold to family business, and this guy was, I think he had to be in his late 50s, early 60s, but he's so
That's
talented.
older? Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty young yet, Lily. Okay. Well, I just want to, we very seldom see earnouts. We dissuade earnouts. And again, from our perspective, the key is we like to maximize the value the best we can through the process.
Yeah.
And again, most of our deals are based on a multiple of earnings, not revenues. I'm talking transaction sizes from 2 million to 25 million.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything the panelists said with a couple of caveats. I mean, if it's a recapitalization transaction, typically
Yep.
the full period is met. And if it's an SBA finance deal, the maximum length of the owner staying on as a consultant or in another capacity is 1 year. So you couldn't do a 2-year agreement with an SBA finance deal.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? Yes, Meg.
I've taken some notes here, so I know three of you could answer this question, but I'll certainly open it to the entire panel. How do you measure in the valuation process your people and your culture?
So the question, if you didn't hear it over here and for the video, is in the valuation process and trying to come up with a price, how do you measure people and culture?
Well, I'll take a start at it. Culture is enormously important, especially the culture of who you're ultimately going to sell to. The people, and the panelists have talked about it, if it's just me, like my firm, I get to come here and do wonderful things like this, but the people behind me are incredible. They're the value. And hopefully you're making sure that you're designing a firm that way, because that is going to help you when it comes time to sell the business. So put it this way, if you don't have that, it's a much lower price tag. The sky's a little bit more of the limit when you can prove that the depth and breadth of the team that you have is what makes the firm so valuable. It becomes a different story.
Yeah, I just piggyback on that. That would increase your expectation of value range. If you have a truly good culture, and I won't, some companies you go in and it's just amazing. You walk through the plant and no one will look at you. You know, it's like they have their heads down and you try to say hi to someone, they go, you know. But, you know, that's really key. Yeah, your expectations of value be much higher range versus a company with poor culture and poor people, poor depth of management especially.
Yeah, I think they've done a great job of saying everything that we need to say so far. Larry, if you want to throw
No,
something.
I agree.
Ben?
Yeah, I agree.
Good question.
Okay,
Very good
concur,
question.
concur. Check, check, check.
Yeah.
All right, other questions from the floor? Yes, right up in here.
What if you run across a situation where the next generation, second, third, whatever it may be, is clearly unqualified to take over the business, and the parents are gonna force it down their throat no matter what the hell happens? How do you handle those situations?
Okay, so if you didn't hear that, thanks for the question, Eric. Sounds like that's a firsthand experience one. So if the next generation is unqualified, but mom and dad, for whatever the reason, feel like they want to keep the business in the family, what happens then?
Again, I'll start, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead. Shoot.
I would hope that business has some key people. If it's just family and it's just the family members, well, so be it, good luck, and we'll see what happens. But if there are other people involved, and let's say it could be a CFO, it could be whatever title, COO, whatever it is, hopefully the person, the matriarch of the family, is going to realize how important it is to keep that person as this transition happens. Because I'm sure over time, when they keep seeing the failures happen, the legacy that they had dreamed about, they have now put in place an opportunity to maybe keep it going.
That's probably one of the earlier questions to ask, if there are family members involved in the company who ask, why aren't you doing something with the family members? And we fortunately haven't had the experience where they've said, we really want to sell it or have it go to the next family member. They usually say, well, Tommy really doesn't have the acumen to run this company, so I need to go source somebody else to buy my company. We haven't had that problem.
Yeah, it's actually pretty common, especially because just in my experience, about 93% of the businesses I've come across have some element of family, not always in a leadership capacity, but certainly in some facet. My experience, what I would say is I would put in some form of bridge leadership to give the kids a chance to mature and see if that's going to take shape. I would also encourage the family to move the kids out for a period of anywhere from 2 to 5 years and get them to experience outside leadership, outside management, outside experiences they could bring back. Sometimes they have a lot of growing up to do, and that's a good time to do it. Those would be the best things that could get going for the business.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've had situations where family members were involved in the business, but they gracefully agreed to transition out and exit over time in cooperation with the buyer. And buyers, they're smart. They're going to figure it out pretty quickly. Yeah. So if the team's not capable of managing the business, it's really going to affect your valuation, or you just may not have a deal at all.
Yeah, I agree with everything the panelists said. From a bank perspective, it would be pretty difficult to finance a transition within the family if the new buyer was not qualified to run the business.
Okay. Last question, yes.
How common might it be to have buyers that want something from the target company that isn't measured by EBITDA? Every time I talk to my customers, multiple the cash flow, but I might want that technology or that tax. Is it 1 in 10 might sell that way, or how many? Or it seems like it's very focused on cash flow.
So the question, question, if you didn't hear it over there, and again, for the video, is how often do buyers want something not measured by EBITDA? And a different way to look at it is, some of the less tangible things that end up being important to buyers.
I'll take a stab. EBITDA is always has always been a component of some fashion, but niche is really a component. I mean, if you have for example, you have a contract manufacturer and you're just going out to the government for bids and you're slamming away these projects, that's one thing. But if you have a niche in that contract world that someone else isn't doing, that comes into valuation a lot as far as prospective acquirers looking at a company. Does that help answer that, or it's something special, Yeah, branded products. Branded products will bring the EBITDA up.
Yeah, I would say, I have a buyer who's looking to acquire a contract manufacturer for that capability. They don't care what the earnings are of that company. It's a build versus buy decision. If you're a software company and you see something whiz bang that somebody else developed and thinks you're going to save a certain number of man hours or time to market, and you're going to use your sales and marketing team to push that out and revamp it, and you don't really care what the earnings are of that company. you're valuing it. It's what is it worth to you in terms of the buyer's business growth. And that's where I think a good advisor can help you, is figuring out from the buyer's perspective. It's not always what is it worth to me or what's the multiple. It's what is that worth to that particular
Absolutely.
buyer, this business.
Yep.
And that can help really fix what the valuation is or change
The
it.
fun deals that I have are when I'm working with a client and it's not EBITDA, it's a strategic buy. Because now it's from here to here. How bad do they want it? Why do they want it? And we should be doing our homework to understand and help advise to our client that it is a strategic buy and look at it from that set of lenses.
Todd, Ben?
Yeah, it's sometimes, they all make great points, but sometimes you have intellectual property. Sometimes it could be something as simple as the land that they sit on.
Absolutely.
You know, things that when looked past, I would say if they're a savvy buyer, they're not gonna be real quick to kind of tip their cards in your direction. But there's always something that comes up. I would say, you know, if it's a private equity, that's almost always gonna be an EBITDA conversation. If it's strategic, generally, they're certainly going to consider EBITDA, but there's very real cases to be made for something that's going to give them an accelerated position somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with what the panelists have said. I think, as they mentioned, it really depends on what kind of buyer it is, and there's a lot of private equity capital out there right now, so it seems like a lot of the buyers are financial buyers and not so much strategic. But I guess one of the downsides of a strategic acquisition is that there's a big impact to employees as well as the legacy of the company, so just something to consider.
And the financial buyers now are becoming strategic buyers. And the private equities now are almost, a lot of times they're strategics because they have so many holdings in specific areas. So it's a different world than it was 10 years ago. It's gotten pretty crazy as far as acquisitions.
Okay, so 2 quick questions. Lightning round, meaning don't take longer than 30 seconds. I got a stopwatch over here too. I'm going to time you.
I'll
Okay,
start.
so what's the best advice you've been given about the exit process?
Start with me.
Whoever.
Put a team around you. Make sure that you're not letting your emotions dictate what you think are the right reasons and decisions that you're making on either side of a transaction.
I guess I have to concur. It's a team. It's a team aspect. I don't know how else to put it. And plan. You've got to plan early. As Larry said, you know, get that transaction attorney involved early. Not your corporate attorney typically. It's somebody that understands transactions. I think that's extremely important.
So for me personally, best advice I ever got, be happy with what you get on the first pass. So when we talk about carryover, you talk about rolling equity and those type of things, it's a very real thing, but it's out of your control. Even though you'll hear somebody say the second bite of the apple, even though it's only 20, 30% could be bigger than the original, but you lose control. So be happy with what you get on the first pass.
I say pay attention to the emotional aspects of the transaction and understand how your client is feeling about the transaction, whether there are family dynamics, things like that, because I think emotion drives a lot of aspects of these deals.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's spending adequate time on the owner readiness part of it and making sure your estate plan is set and that you've got hobbies and things to do after you exit to keep you busy.
Okay. How about same thing, quick answer, blind spots that people don't see coming?
I would say not doing their due diligence. I think that if you don't do your due diligence, you will find blind spots in a deal. And again, I'll go back to surround yourself with a team because we all add a piece of value to helping uncover some of those things. So that would be my answer.
Understanding where your management team is and what their future, how they feel about their future with the company. And don't be afraid to get somebody to come in and do a quality of earnings
prior to going out, because you're gonna find surprises on those financial statements.
Yeah,
I don't care if they're audited, they'll get surprises.
I agree.
I have a few thoughts on that. I would say, first of all, never underestimate the role of the spouse, when buyer or seller. Sometimes they're super supportive and incredibly helpful to that, and sometimes it makes people take a hard left turn that nobody saw coming.
Good point.
I would say never underestimate the toll the 11th hour will take on the seller, because we talked about how emotional it is, and for all the numbers you're going to discuss, you're still going to be laying in bed awake at night talking to yourself about, am I doing the right thing for myself, my people? Is this the right time? And the last thing I would say is, and this is an old cliche, but it's true, is every deal dies 3 times. So on the way through, you're going to think this thing is killed 3 different times, and you've got to keep working through it.
And I would just add to that, never fall in love with a deal.
Yeah. And they die more than 3 times.
I'd say involve your advisors early, especially your tax advisors, so that they know you're thinking of selling the company. They can help you structure the transaction in appropriate way and help you understand, hey, if this is a stock deal, what's the tax impact versus an asset deal, making sure your books are in order and accurately reflect what's happening in the company. And then the second thing that people really underestimate is how much time it's going to take in terms of due diligence and negotiating the deal. So while you're running your business, you're basically working 2 jobs, and how long it's going to take. And it's a marathon. So it's like 8 months, all out, big deal, and you're fully engaged 24/7. And you have to be ready for that and mentally prepared.
Yeah, I'd say 2 things. It's balancing your personal expectations of what your company is worth versus market realities. And second, it's never too early to start planning, because everybody's going to exit their business at some day. There's a saying about the 5 Ds of how you exit the business. It's death, divorce, disagreement, disaster, disability. And so you want to be prepared for all of that. So start your plan.
Okay, so to close up, kind of one last thought, again, 30 seconds or less.
Put a team together. Don't let the emotions get in the way. Don't fall in love with the deal, and utilize the team you put together.
That's good. That's great. I think you covered it.
Yeah. Get the right team, professionalize the business, and avoid waiting. You are going to get warranty issues sooner or later, whether it's knees, hips, back, cancer, divorce, it all happens.
Yeah, I'd say start early engaging your advisors, and start early thinking about a sale, because you can maximize your value by early planning.
Yep, assemble the right team and think about ways to eliminate risk from your business.
Okay, so we heard a little bit about tax advisors. Didn't have tax advisors on the panelists, but I have Eric over here and Ryan over here. Boulay and I are facilitating an ESOP discussion a week from Friday, so 9 days from now. That was kind of a companion to this panel today, so anybody who wants to learn about ESOPs, that's a week from Friday, November 8th. And then the next Club E Upsize event is January 23rd, so we're going to go through the holidays and into 2020, as hard as that is to say or even believe, but we'll be talking about family businesses on January 23rd. Hope to see you all before then, but let's give a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you again for coming and hang out and interact with the folks in the room as long as you would like. Thank you again for coming. See ya.